Solange, yes. Hey, everybody, good morning. That's a huge picture of me, and I had much shorter hair behind me. I'm so excited to be here, and I thank you so much for the great introduction. I think what I'm really most excited about is that I am here. So just like the gentleman just mentioned, is that my new role really does focus on diversity and inclusion, but I was adamant that I think that where sometimes we lose diversity and inclusion programs is in the work. And spending 11 years on the business side, in social and in strategy, it was really important to me to affect how we do a lot of HR programs and recruitment, but also continue to think about how inclusion and diversity are so important in the work that we do. So I want to take you guys through a phenomenon that means so much to me. It's really been the Kickstarter to the transition in my campaign. And I think it's also just super, super interesting. So follow along with me. First, I want to start talking about perspective. So we're all strategists in this room, and I think we understand how important perspective is, and it really is why we've gotten to this business. We have a certain vantage point that we can bring to our clients. It's what our clients look for from us as a particular perspective. I think it's also important to understand that in this industry, we all know that we are fighting for more diversity, more inclusion. So really, as strategists, we're starting with a piece of the story. If we don't have everybody in the room that makes up the entire world that we're selling to, then we don't have the whole story. And any strategist knows if you don't have all the data, you can't create a real path to success and to really solve business problems. So I want to ask a question in here, and I'm wondering what the answers are going to be, and it will lead into a little bit about what I'm going to talk about in Black Twitter and how this is an example. So if anybody has ever heard the word bae, raise your hand. Ooh, I'm impressed, y'all. Okay. How about on fleek? Oh, y'all look good. Y'all okay? Cool. All right. So you've heard these words, and you're probably like, they're in the vernacular, they're in popular culture, but where do they come from? They come from Black Twitter, y'all. They do. So I think it's so important to understand that most of this room raised their hands when I asked about really popular vernacular. I think we've probably seen the Denny's and the IHOPs and tweet with bae and all of these words, but how involved are the people who make up this community that has brought this popular culture to the forefront? How involved are they really in our work, in agencies and in marketing companies? How does that disconnect happen? So I think it's important to really hinge on the fact that we know that diversity and inclusion does help to lead and propel popular culture, but for the people who I just mentioned, we understand that Black Americans are not as represented in agency life, and that they really do make up this particular segment that I'm going to be speaking about. So why are they not here? As strategists, why are we not getting the whole story? And please know that today I'm going to take you through a particular community, but this is just one example of the communities that are so underrepresented in this industry that we have to do better, and that we honestly cannot do our jobs well without having a full and complete story and a full perspective of people from various backgrounds. So we have to do better. We have to evolve. We've got to get past where we are now. There are so many programs just getting and jumping into the inclusion and diversity side that I have now learned about that have been around for like 40 years. So why am I up here talking about this in the 2017? Why are we still having this problem? We have to evolve how we think, and that could mean a number of things, and I'll kind of cover some of that today. And what that really means is that we have to expand our consciousness. And I'll talk about what that means a little bit in just a few as I get through exactly what Black Twitter is. And I kind of use this as an example to show you guys what I mean when I say we need to really rethink what does someone in this industry look like. I think we all got very complacent with thinking through like what someone in an industry, in an agency looks like, or at a marketing company, or in marketing at a brand. And I think we need to really dismantle that and start to peel back the walls and think about what is creative, what is strategic, what could someone who has that to offer look like or be like. And I think that we need to force ourselves to do better. And I will show you with this community just how we can start to do that. Okay, another question. Raise your hand. Now be honest with me, y'all, if you really know what Black Twitter is. Okay, all right, y'all are honest, okay, so what I'm gonna do now is explain to you what it is, because it really is hard to explain, it's tough. So we'll start with what it is. And one of the quotes that's really important and I always explain this, is that if you don't know Black Twitter, then you cannot find Black Twitter. It's happening in plain sight, and nobody knows what it is, and I'll explain kind of why that is. But first, let's talk about what is it. So what it is it's kind of a collective group of predominantly Black people, or people who identify with the Black experience. So everyone is not Black in Black Twitter, and everyone who is Black does not associate with Black Twitter. It is kind of a collective group that identifies with a particular experience. And what they do is use the medium of Twitter to communicate, to share, to come together, to protect, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And kind of everything that happens in this medium, on this platform, is through the tapestry of Black culture. So it's not a quantifiable group. It's not something where it's like, oh, I've got that in my bio on Twitter, and it's not a separate app, because people have asked. People have asked. And I'll talk a little bit more about what it's not, but it is something that is really hard to pinpoint, and I'll kind of explain why it's hard to pinpoint. So really, right now, think of it more as a phenomenon that really propels and pushes pop culture forward. So if you know what it is, I gotta tell you what it ain't. And what it's not, and this is important even in thinking about inclusion and diversity, what it's not is a monolith of Black people. You know, everybody in this room is completely different. No one or two people are exactly the same, and it's important to understand that. And so often with different communities, specifically communities of color, we get put in this box, you know, well, everyone, you know, who's Black likes rap music, and everybody who's this likes that, and that's not fair or accurate, and I think as strategists in this room, we understand that. And so it's important to understand that this is not a monolith of all Black people. It's not representative of everybody. And there's people in this group who have difference of opinions, there's different demographics, there's different geographical locations, and all of that makes up this really incredible phenomenon, and to see it happen and watch it in real time and see what they've done is really actually awesome. And if you'll notice my little black turtle bird there, this is actually from another story. This is a much longer presentation that I can't believe people sit through, but they do. And this is a small story that I would love to get into more, and I will be able to share that with you. But this brown Twitter bird does have some of the origins of Black Twitter behind it. So I talked a lot about the idea that if you don't know Black Twitter, then you can't find Black Twitter, right? So this is a really interesting phenomenon, and this is called, what we think Black Twitter is a form of digital signifying. So you'll notice I have my apostrophe there, because if you put the G on signifying, it actually makes it an entirely different word. Signifying is actually something that was, it was a word that was created to describe specifically Black culture and kind of how we communicate. And what it means is that we use tropes or hyperbole, often humor, in the way that we communicate to speak to each other. And so there's a book called The Signifying Monkey that really does get into that, and this was a little bit before the G had been removed, as it has been in present times. But this really goes into kind of this theory of how African Americans speak. And it's important to understand, again, this goes into perspective, why African Americans are in this country may speak a certain way. And it's because our history here, since we came here to this country in the early 1600s, has been steeped in survival. And I think it's, you know, even in recent day, you can see that that's something that continues. So when we came here, and the way we had to communicate was consistently almost hidden. So if you think about during slavery times and Harriet Tubman, who led so many people on the Underground Railroad, Negro spirituals were created to be coded messages. So the song Wade in the Water was actually a coded message to tell slaves to tread through water so that the dogs could not follow their scent. And so this is the way that African Americans began how they communicated with each other. It's a way of speaking through survival. And that kind of continued. And so the way that we speak to each other has always been clear to us, but has never been on a platform where the rest of the world could see and be a part of that. And so what's so interesting with Twitter is that this is kind of the first time that a traditionally marginalized community has had a platform where in a millisecond they can speak to the whole world. So a lot of these conversations that were taking place in nail salons and black barber shops are now on a platform. But like I just said, as they take place, people who don't identify with that culture don't even understand that it's happening. So as strategists, you can see how important that missing piece could be as we're building strategies to connect with different communities. We have to have the representation in the room to really have a layer over the data that we receive. And that, you mentioned cultural resonance, is actually in my title, and I'm excited about it because it's something that we thought of at VML when it means to really resonate with the culture. Uh-oh. Okay, we'll get it back, but I'll keep going. And so what I think is really important about cultural resonance and why I'm excited that the Strategy Fest was happy to have me here is because, again, we need to understand how data is great. We use it, we love building strategies from it, but if we don't have that layer of culture over it, then we're not going to understand where to go. And so there's another form of speaking here called the dozens. So my mom would be laughing right now because this is really popular in the 70s. Another, again, only attributed to really Black Americans. And the way the dozens worked is that they're your mama jokes. Who's heard of your mama joke before? Okay. Y'all are cool. I like you guys. Y'all are cool. Y'all are really cool. I'm not going to do one because I don't want to get laughed out the room, but I think you guys know what that means. But it's interesting because the dozens were really kind of created in the late 60s and 70s, and it was an interesting time for Black Americans because we were coming out of Jim Crow and still in Jim Crow in some of the southern states. And they were almost created to just, again, think about signifying. It means using humor, using hyperbole, using different ways to kind of deal with some of the issues that we're going through in the community. So your mama jokes, if you guys know them, they're usually starting with things like, your mama is so fat, she's so poor. And so there were jokes, but really what they were people dealing with awful parts of their society and oppression in a way that turned it in a humorous way. And you'll see how Black Twitter actually does that to this day as we still continue with a lot of these things. So I want to go through some of the key themes of Black Twitter. It's so vast and it does so many things, and it probably is hard to even grasp what I'm saying. So I want to kind of take you through what the community does as a whole and go through some of the key themes. The first theme I think is really important to understand is that protection. Again, going back to our existence in this country is that, again, we must protect each other. We must, continue to keep survival at the top of our list when it comes to even people that, that we don't know. It's the camaraderie that has been essential for how we've made it through this country and continue to make it here. So it's important to know that Black Twitter, again, it provides an area of protection. There's so many, I started this presentation in September 2016, and there have been so many examples since then, unfortunately, many negative that have afforded an example for this. I think just recently you can see, I know any football players, football lovers in here, there's a big kind of thing going on with Kaepernick, something that just recently happened with ESPN and Jamel Hill. And this stuff is happening. These are our people. These are people who we have to protect. So we come to Twitter to protect our own. And this, those are big stars. But there was a young boy who actually kneeled for Kaepernick at a small football game in Massachusetts, and he was suspended for his right to protest, or as he felt, to do as he felt. And we all came together and called the school. We tweeted out numbers of that school and called the principal and demanded that he not be suspended for exercising his right of free speech. And that child was actually that was rescinded. So I want you to understand that Black Twitter is a place where we can come together and protect each other for some of the oppression and the systemic institutions that we still continue to fight against to this day. And it's incredible for a community that has been so long silenced, or the narrative has been kind of tweaked in a way that wasn't always with our perspective first, that we now have this platform to speak to the world. Reinforcement. So reinforcement is really, really important because, again, kind of piggybacking off my last point, is that we didn't always have a place where our narrative could be first. We were not in the newsrooms in the 60s. We were literally still fighting against a lot of the oppression in different industries. And so, again, that perspective was not there. And many times it was bent and turned and twisted in a way that wasn't always conducive or honest to the Black community. So now we can challenge these things. In one tweet, we can challenge CNN and their coverage. In one tweet, we can challenge MSNBC and say, actually, no, that's not what we think. And one example that comes to mind is the idea of gentrification. There was an article done about a white family that had moved into a traditionally Black neighborhood that was slowly being gentrified. And the article was literally on the bravery of this family to send their kids to the public school where these Black kids had thrived for years. And that would have been something that ran in, let's say, 1984 on CNN, and we would have watched it and went away, but not this time. Hannah Jones, who writes about education equality for the New York Times, actually challenged that author and really took her to task and said, how dare you say that, that they are brave for being in a school that so many of us had already been in a district that wasn't that great, but that the kids had thrived in. And that author was very embarrassed and actually did a Twitter chat after that to really talk through with the community what that looks like and what education inequality means and how it affects different communities. And so, again, we can reinforce these arguments and we can take hold of our own narrative. But again, I hope this is showing you how much we may be missing in our strategic meetings, how many pieces of the puzzle that we may not have when we are building out how to connect with consumers. We have to have these perspectives to really build human connections. And I think that there's no better time than now with the climate that we're in today. And then there's celebration, which is one of my favorites. So again, we're being super honest up here, and I think you guys can, I can be honest with you in saying that, Black culture is not always celebrated. Many times we're not viewed as innocent, we're not viewed as beautiful, and that's across several different industries in the way that we've been portrayed. And so it's important to us, again, for self-care, to really celebrate who we are, and Black Twitter gives us a chance to do that. It gives us a chance to congratulate Tracee Ellis Ross on her Emmy nomination for Blackish. It gives us a chance to, really just congratulate, even if it's just a young person who's done something extraordinary that we don't know, and raise each other up, again, as we continue in this society that is often very oppressive. And so it's important to understand that this is an outlet, and this is a place where we're celebrating, but the world can see us. This is not a nail salon or a barbershop, where we all cheered and when Michael Jackson moonwalked for the first time in the 25th Motown anniversary. Now you can see that cheer, you can see that happiness and how powerful and how dedicated we are to our communities. So celebration is very important. And going back to the what it ain't slide, I think it's important also to really enforce that reflection is a part of this community too. So I talk a lot about how we corral together, and we absolutely do. But it's also not a community that always agrees. There's several different things here that really have affected different groups of Black people, whether it's just beliefs, whether it's just, literally historic kind of institutions that have shaped who we are as a culture, and there's a lot of dissension there sometimes. And so it's not a community that constantly agrees all the time, and there will be different factions on it, but it's also a part of understanding who we are. Again, we're not all the same person. So even as you see some of these things play out, whether it be about R. Kelly the singer or Bill Cosby or different opinions, you can see that there's different parts of the culture that we need to, as strategists, understand all of those as it relates to this community. Pop culture is one of my faves. I hope you guys follow me. I'm at Goddess Rivera on Twitter because I love to live tweet. Who watches How to Get Away with Murder? Anybody is coming back soon? Shonda, yes. TGIT, yes. So I love pop culture through thinking through it with Black Twitter because, again, it's just that commentary that we would do in our mom's basement. And, when we first saw Michael Jackson's Remember the Time video, we talked about that for 6 months, but that was 1993 and nobody saw that, nobody heard that. And now what Black Twitter does is gives us this place to see kind of pop culture through our lens, whether it's American Horror Story, which, oh my God, I watched last night, geez, or, something that's, like a presidential address. These are the things that you can see our community speak through and talk about. And I think it's really interesting to see, especially for brands who, or companies who at times are the subject of this pop culture. And also this really harkens back to our meme culture, which has really been elevated by Black Twitter. And that is, again, a part of that digital signifying. That's the evolution of the dozens of, talking in code, but with these memes that kind of still only we can understand and are very humorous. And these are just kind of some examples here. I mentioned Tracy Ellis Ross and kind of celebration. You'll see some memes there. Rihanna from The Wiz looking good in her green. And just kind of some things that you guys, and I can send this around after, that I've kind of touched on all of these, just some different examples from what we talked about earlier. I have a couple minutes left, so I'm going to try and speed through this. But I want to touch on this last portion here. So activism, I think, is probably one of the most important themes that has come out of Black Twitter. When I was making this presentation last year, and I was kind of going through it with my mom and asking who had no idea what Black Twitter was. And she was saying to me, after I explained it to her, she was like, wow, if the Black Panthers had had Twitter, things would be so different today. And that was so kind of heavy for me, and it made me understand the gravitas and the power of what we have here. This has been a place where we can organize, where we can be strategic and really start to bring back some of the organization that's needed to dismantle some of the oppression and the systemic institutions in this country. So to watch that happen, again, with Black Lives Matter has been, to me, nothing short of fascinating and remarkable. And I think it's important to understand the role that digital plays, particularly Twitter. And so you can just see some examples here. I don't know if you guys can see as well, but like this here was an example of about 10 minutes after Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson. And on CNN, there's riots and people were screaming and crying, but a friend of mine from MSNBC just tweeted, "There's hope," because there was a prayer circle. So again, like, that is what we're seeing through our eyes, and it gives us a place and a chance to really tell our stories our way. And that's a part of activism as well, making sure that we're on the ground saying what is happening, what is true, and what means something to us, and making sure that we don't forget that we're human and that we are sad and we are frustrated and why. And so it's really interesting to see how this comes to life on Twitter. So I think I talk a lot about why we need to pay attention to this. I hope you guys know. This community is not going away. It's only getting stronger. So we have to take notice. And it's not just this community. This world is changing. Everyone's talking about 2044, where the demographics in the United States will be very different than they've been traditionally. Families are very different. And in the larger presentation, I talk a lot about just understanding the differences that could come. Again, just thinking through some of the historical iniquities, there are many families who have been affected by poverty. Sometimes a family is a grandmother raising 3 kids. Sometimes, it's someone who comes from a different socioeconomic background. But I think what we need to do is understand that we need to have all of those perspectives when we do our work. We cannot do this without understanding what it's like to be in a lot of these people's shoes. And I think we need to do that by having them and continuing to be an inclusive part of what we do. And the other thing I love about Black Twitter is that it really does kind of turn on its head what we think may be creative. So I talked to you guys through people who create hilarious memes that get tons of shares that you'll probably see on BuzzFeed and, Refinery 29. But those are copywriters. Those are strategists who organize those protests for Black Lives Matter, but they're not in our industry. And I think that we need to really consider, what does creativity look like to us? What does it mean to us? What does a strategist look like? And I think, of course, we've all done our due diligence and moved up in our careers and had experience, but I think there's so much potential out there that we may kind of be skimming over and not understand. So I want you guys to use Black Twitter as an example of a different way to think about inclusion, why it's important, and also sourcing, and understanding that there may be someone out there who's not the traditional copywriter, but may be amazing, potential-wise. And so not only can they bring the talent, but they can also bring the perspective that I gave today. And again, this is just an example of so many communities that we need to do a better job of being more inclusive with. So that is why it matters to us. And I'm almost out of time. So I hope that, that my presentation today, I hope it just helps you rethink your mindset and really rethink who can be in this industry and who should be in this industry and why we need more inclusive people to be in this industry to do our jobs as best as we can. So, and with that, it is really time, guys, to expand our consciousness. Thank you so much.